The doctor scanned him, then asked if he was dying. My name is Kale Sand. I am 63 years old. I have spent 41 years surveying infrastructure for the Federation, bridges across contested highland passes, relay towers on dust-choked frontier moons, water reclamation pipelines through terrain that tried to kill me regularly, and failed only by a smaller and smaller margin each decade. I have mapped the bones of 31 worlds and handed the blueprints to people who lived on them afterward without ever knowing my name. I am not sentimental about that. The work was the work. I found the work to be enough, for the most part, and the parts where it was not enough I managed through the simple expedient of continuing to do the work anyway. I retired 14 months ago, officially. My body had decided that 41 years of plateau exposure, altitude variation, and sustained moderate physical labor was an adequate career, even if my brain had not yet reached the same conclusion. My wife had been dead for 3 years by then, and the apartment on Way Station Keth Varel, the apartment we had picked together because it faced east and the morning light came in at a good angle, and there was a table we both liked, felt approximately the size of a coffin after she was gone. Not a hostile space, just a space with too much presence of absence, if you understand what I mean by that. I kept finding her things in places I had not expected, and not in places I had. The calibrated coffee press, the yellow data transfer cable she used for her design work, the secondary wool blanket she kept in the sitting room cupboard because she ran cold. What I am doing now is technically classified as a final contract survey assignment on Keth Voron Plateau, a frontier moon with a collapsed infrastructure grid, and a Federation resettlement authority that wanted a damage assessment before committing to reconstruction funding. The moon had a boundary dispute history and a population of approximately 4,000 resettled Velocivar nationals living in prefab settlement clusters, and the infrastructure serving those clusters was 40 years old and failing in a number of ways that a damage assessment would helpfully specify. Unofficially, I took the contract because the apartment felt like a coffin, and I thought the survey work might remind me what I was for. It is working, partially. The plateau is bleak and enormous and smells of chalk and cold minerals, and a sharper undertone of something iron-adjacent that comes, I am told, from the geological layer about 300 meters below the surface, where there is a band of old volcanic material that outgasses slowly through the chalk. The wind sounds like someone reading aloud from a very long list. The light in the 4th month, which is when this story begins, is the particular pale gold of high-altitude mornings when there is no cloud cover, and the atmosphere is thin enough that the light does not scatter properly, and everything looks slightly too sharp and slightly too far away. I find this restful, the excess clarity, the excess distance. It suits a person who has been trying to find the right amount of distance from things. What I did not expect, what I could not have predicted through any extrapolation from the contract terms, the site documentation, or 41 years of professional experience, was the child. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the scanner first, and about what the doctor said, because that is where this story actually begins. And the scanner is the detail that makes everything else make sense. The Federation Forward Medical Post at Keth Voron Plateau is a prefab structure that someone set up 6 months ago and is clearly not entirely happy about the arrangement. It sits on the south edge of the survey grid, at the intersection of 2 access corridors, 4 white composite modules bolted together at angles that suggest the assembly team was working against both a dead line and a persistent headwind. There is a water reclamation unit on the northwest corner that makes a sound like a cat clearing its throat. There is a generator that cycles on and off at intervals that never become predictable. There is a communication relay antenna on the roof that picks up about 60% of what it should, which Deva As, the medical officer who runs the post, has been requesting a replacement for since month 2 with no result. Deva As is 38. She runs the post alone except for a supply technician named Sovan who comes through every 12 days with resupply, and a brief window of company that she seems to appreciate without being demonstrative about it. She has the posture of someone who has been asked too many questions, and the eyes of someone who is still answering them all, efficiently, without visible resentment. She has been on Keth Voron for 7 months. When I came to her post for the first time in the second week of my contract and made the mistake of asking how she was finding it, she said, "It has a lot of mineral content," and I respected her immediately. I came to her post on a Tuesday in the 4th month. I had not come because I was unwell. I had come because the post sits at the junction of 2 survey corridors, and I needed to file a weekly checkpoint registration, which is a Federation contractor safety requirement that exists because too many survey contractors on frontier moons have disappeared between checkpoints without anyone noticing for an inconvenient length of time. It is a reasonable requirement. I have no strong feelings about it beyond that. I filed the registration. I drank the tea Deva As offered because refusing offered tea on a frontier post is a social crime that the Compact Administrative Code does not specifically prohibit, but probably should. The tea was excellent. She grows a particular Highland mint variety in a set of small containers on the windowsill of the medical module, and adds it fresh. I was going to leave after the tea. Then the door opened. What came through, it was approximately the size of a 10-year-old child. It had lavender skin, the particular lavender of the Velocivar outer plateau subspecies, a shade lighter than the urban court variety, pale enough that, in the sharp 4th-month light through the post's windows, it seemed to be made of something different from ordinary matter. It had silver-white hair, matted and unkempt, falling across its face in strands that had not been arranged in a long time. It had oversized eyes, deep amber, enormous, the specific oversized proportion that exists in beings who evolved in low-light environments and still carry the biological machinery for reading darkness, even when they are standing in full noon illumination. They were the most striking eyes I had ever seen on any being, of any species, and I have worked alongside a significant variety of species in 41 years of frontier survey work. It had pointed ears, fine-boned, with the slight upward curve distinctive to Velocivar court lineage. It was wearing what appeared to have once been a Velocivar ceremonial robe, pale blue-gray fabric with metallic trim at the collar and cuffs, a formal garment, the kind worn at household events of some significance. The robe was now in a condition that suggested it had spent considerable time somewhere very different from where it started. The metallic trim was dulled, and in some places absent. The fabric was torn at the left hem and worn through at both elbows. There was a faint iridescent quality to the surface, like oil on water but more subtle, more internal, a quality that I did not know how to categorize and so simply noted. It stood in the doorway for approximately 3 seconds, and then it collapsed. I caught it. I do not know why I was the one who caught it. I was standing closer to the door than Deva As was, and I am faster than I look, or was faster 40 years ago, and apparently the muscle memory has not entirely given up. I caught the child before she hit the floor. She was lighter than she should have been for her size, lighter in the way that suggests the body has been running on insufficient fuel for an extended period, and has managed by reconfiguring itself around the deficiency. I caught her under the arms and held her. She smelled of stone and cold space, and something underneath both of those things that I could not identify and could not stop trying to identify. Something faintly electric, like the smell that builds near a power relay junction in the moments before a fault, except quieter and more intimate. Put her on the examination table, Deva As said. She was already moving. I put her on the examination table. I stepped back because the space needed to belong to Deva As now. I stood against the wall and watched. What happened next is the part I keep returning to, 3 months later, when I am trying to explain why I made the decisions I made. Deva As, ran a standard Federation bioscanner across the child. The Federation bioscanner is a device I have seen used on construction sites, on survey teams, on border intake processing counters, in field hospitals, in resettlement processing halls. It is reliable, standardized, calibrated to detect any registered Federation biological signature, plus 47 compact member species, plus a broad baseline anomaly sweep for everything else. It is not subtle technology. It is designed, with considerable engineering redundancy, to find living things. It is very good at finding living things. It did not find the child. The scanner returned no organic signature detected across the entire surface of a child who was visibly, demonstrably breathing on the examination table in front of us. Deva Os ran it a second time, starting from the head and going to the feet. No organic signature detected. She adjusted the calibration, the manual override, which you use when the scanner is giving a false negative due to electromagnetic interference, unusual mineral composition in the surrounding environment, or equipment malfunction. She ran it a third time, and a fourth, and a fifth, each with a slightly different calibration setting. Every pass returned the same result: no organic signature detected. Deva Os put the scanner down. She placed it on the instrument tray with a care that suggested she was concentrating very hard on placing it correctly, which is what people do when they are using a familiar physical action to anchor themselves while processing something unexpected. She looked at the child, who was breathing shallow, rapid, but regular, and then she looked at me. I have spent 41 years surveying infrastructure. I have had the experience, many times, of a measuring instrument telling me that something is not there which I can plainly see with my own eyes. The instrument is telling me the truth as it can detect it. My eyes are telling me the truth as I can observe it. The reconciliation of those two truths is the work. "Is she dying?" I asked. Deva Os was quiet for a long moment. She has a face that thinks before it commits to an expression. Then she said, "I don't know what she is." I looked at the child on the table. The child's amber eyes were open now. She had been unconscious when I caught her, or close to it, but she was coming back. She was watching Deva Os with an expression that was not fear. It was too exhausted for fear, which is a specific kind of expression that takes some time to produce in a person, the kind that comes from fear having been present for so long that it has become the background condition rather than the active experience. Wary. The way an animal looks when it has been startled enough times that wariness has become its resting state, the place it returns to when nothing is actively happening. I pulled a chair from against the wall to the side of the examination table, and I sat down. The child's eyes moved to me. I held the gaze without doing anything with it. No smile, no particular expression of concern, just the attention itself steady. I said, "The scanner couldn't find you." The child looked at me for a long moment without responding. Then she said something I could not understand, 3 syllables in what I thought might be Velocivar court dialect, the older register, the formal one that predates the compact standardization, and that you encounter occasionally in old documents and almost never in living speech. I did not know this word, but the tone was not hostile. It was the tone of someone who has identified something and named it. I said, "I don't speak your language well. Can you speak standard?" She blinked. Then, very slowly, in standard, with an accent I had not heard before, flat and unhurried in a way that was different from the flat and unhurried quality of most Velocivar standard speakers, with vowels that sat in unusual places, as if the words had been learned from a source that itself spoke at a slight angle to normal usage, she said, "I have been inside for a long time." I said, "Inside where?" She did not answer that. She closed her eyes. I stayed. This was not a decision I made, exactly, in the sense of having reached a conclusion through a deliberate reasoning process. I was registered at the checkpoint. My contract obligation for the day was fulfilled. There was nothing in the contract that required me to remain at a medical post. But leaving felt like a thing I was not willing to do. And I have learned in 63 years that when leaving feels like something I am not willing to do, I should not do it, because the feeling is usually accurately describing the situation. Deva Os did not ask me to leave. I do not know whether she wanted me to stay or simply had more immediately pressing matters than my continued presence in her medical module. I brought my survey notes from the bag I had been carrying when I came in, and I sat at the secondary table in the corner, and I worked through the morning's calculation reconciliation, while Deva Os ran secondary scans on the child, who had fallen into a heavy sleep. The secondary scans picked up something. Not in the organic tissue range, the bioscanner was still returning negative on that setting, but in the electromagnetic range, at a frequency Deva Os had not had reason to look for before. There was a resonance there, faint, irregular but real. She ran it 3 times to confirm it was not instrument noise. It was not instrument noise. Something was producing a consistent electromagnetic signature in the child's cellular structure. Just not a signature the bioscanner's standard algorithm was designed to detect. Deva Os spent the first 2 hours of the child's sleep on a communication channel to the Federation Medical Research Archive. I heard her side of the conversation without trying to listen to it. The small room and the generator noise and the thin walls of the composite module made selective inattention difficult. And what I heard was the measured voice of someone who is describing something unprecedented, in the careful language of someone who has learned that careful language is what gets taken seriously. At some point during this I made tea. I brought Deva Os a cup without interrupting her communication. I brought one to the table near the child's sleeping head as well, not because the child was going to wake up and drink it, but because it seemed like the right thing to have there. I sat back down near the child. At some point, I cannot tell you exactly when because I was focused on my calculations and time on a frontier moon in the 4th month moves at the particular pace of days that are fully occupied. The child turned in her sleep. She had been on her back, one arm at her side, the other pressed to her chest over the area of the pocket in the robe. She turned toward where I was sitting slowly, and her right hand opened on the examination table surface, palm up, fingers slightly curled, the specific posture of a hand that has stopped holding onto something it was holding onto while the person was awake. The posture of a body that has, during sleep, decided the space next to it is safe enough to be less defended. I did not touch the hand. That was not mine to do, and I am old enough and sufficiently familiar with the specific privacy of sleeping children that I know this without having to think about it. But I did not move away from it either. I let it be where it was. The child woke up 4 hours after she had gone to sleep. She oriented immediately. Her amber eyes went to the ceiling, to the walls, to Deva Os at the scan station, and then to me, in the rapid sequence of someone who has become accustomed to waking in unfamiliar places and has developed an efficient protocol for establishing what kind of unfamiliar place this one is. She looked at me for a long time, then she said in standard, "You did not leave." "No," I said. "Why?" I thought about how to answer this honestly without making the honest answer into something larger than it was. I said, "I didn't have anywhere better to be." This was more honest than I intended it to be, in the sense that it was true in ways I had not necessarily planned to disclose to a child I had met 4 hours ago. But the child was not looking at it the way people look at an inadvertent disclosure. She was looking at it the way she had looked at the ceiling and the walls, assessing it, finding where it sat, deciding what it meant. She nodded, once, very small, as if she had asked the question with a specific answer in mind, and the answer I had given was the one she had been checking for. Deva Os came over from the scan station. She had a tablet with the secondary scan results and the first preliminary response from the archive's on-call physician, which had come in during the child's sleep. She said, Can I ask you some questions? The child looked at her. You are a doctor. Yes. You want to know what is wrong with me? I want to understand what I'm seeing, Deva As said. This was more careful than most people would have managed. The distinction between those two framings, what is wrong with you versus what I'm seeing, is not a small one, and the fact that Deva As made it without apparent effort told me something about her. The child was quiet for a moment. She seemed to be deciding something. Then she said, I have been inside the fold. I knew what a spacetime fold was. Every infrastructure engineer knows what a spacetime fold is. They are one of the hazards you map around when you are running relay towers near contested space boundaries, pockets of compressed spacetime geometry that occur naturally near mass concentration events and cause measurement anomalies in standard survey equipment. You can detect a fold by the way the survey tools behave near it. The range instruments give inconsistent readings, the directional sensors drift, the mapping data starts to produce geometries that cannot exist in standard spacetime. You mark them on the grid. You route around them. Nobody goes into them on purpose. They are not places. They are, technically and precisely, absences of normal space. Deva As wrote something down on her tablet. How long were you inside? I don't know how long, the child said. Time is different inside. It is not consistent. It stretches in some directions and compresses in others, and there is no way to measure it from within because all measuring depends on time being consistent, and inside it is not. She said this in the tone of someone who has thought about it very carefully for a considerable period of time, and has arrived at the most accurate description they can produce. Deva As said, What's your name? Soval, the child said. The story came out over the next 2 days, not in a single telling but in layers, the way geological strata come out when you're surveying a cut, the surface layer first, then deeper ones as the work progresses, each one requiring its own tools to read. Soval was the daughter of a Velocivar household. She did not name the household directly, and I did not push for the name, because she was careful about specifics in a way that suggested she had been trained to be careful, which meant her household was one whose name carried weight that could be used by people who wished to use it against her, or had learned to be careful through experience, which could mean various things. I did not know yet which it was. Her household had been involved in a boundary dispute in the outer Kethvoron contested zone. The nature of the dispute she summarized briefly and without detail. It was a property claim dispute of the kind that the contested zone produces regularly, involving 2 households and a section of plateau territory, and an administrative body that was making decisions about the territory, while the dispute was still formally unresolved. This is a common situation on the outer plateau. I have surveyed around a number of such disputes. At some point during the dispute, she did not say when, did not say why, a household transport had gone into the fold territory near the Kethvoron Plateau's eastern face. The fold was not marked on the relevant maps. The fold territory was, she said, something that the household had been using as a transit route. It was faster, she thought, though she was not sure she had understood the adult's reasons correctly, because she had been very young when the practice started, and had only understood that the eastern approach took less time than the alternative routes. The transport had gone into the fold. She did not know what had happened after that. Her memory of the event itself was non-sequential. She remembered light and then not light, and the sensation of the geometry around her being different, wrong in a way she had no previous experience to name, and then the absence of the transport and the people who had been in it, and then being inside the fold alone. She did not say what had happened to the others. I did not ask. Deva As did not ask. There are questions you do not ask when someone is in the process of finding their way back from something, because asking them forces the person to go back before they have found sufficient ground to stand on. She had been inside the fold for what she estimated as months. She was uncertain about the estimate because, as she had explained, Time inside the fold was not consistent. But she had slept many times and eaten. There was material in the fold, she said, that was not exactly food but sustained the body, something she had discovered because her body had required her to discover it, and she thought months was the right order of magnitude. The fold had collapsed. She did not know why. Folds collapse. It is a property of their physics, though the timeline is not predictable. When the fold collapsed, it had expelled her onto the plateau surface approximately 2 kilometers from the medical post. She had been disoriented for some time after the expulsion. The return to standard spacetime geometry was not immediate, she said. She had spent what felt like a long time learning to see properly again, and then she had seen the post and walked to it. That was the only thing I could see, she said. That was the only structure. I walked to it. Deva said, "You did the right thing." Soval looked at her with the patient amber eyes. "It was the only thing," she said. "I do not know if it was right. It was what there was." On the second day, Deva received the full response from the Federation Medical Research Archive. She read it in the scan station, then came and sat down at the secondary table where I was working. She did not ask me to listen. She simply began reading, and her reading aloud was, I think, the way she processes things that are large. The archive's response confirmed what Deva had theorized from the secondary scan data. Fold exposure tissue adaptation was a documented phenomenon, first formally recorded in survey equipment that had been carried through fold territory during the early expansion period, before fold hazards were fully mapped. The equipment had returned incorrect readings for months after exposure, until the crystalline structure of certain sensor components gradually re-entrained to standard spacetime geometry. In biological tissue, the archive explained, the effect was analogous. Extended exposure to fold spacetime geometry produced a frequency shift in the electromagnetic resonance signature of cellular structures, not a structural change to the cells themselves, which remained intact and functional, but a shift in the specific resonance frequency they produced. The cells were present. The cells were working. They were resonating at a range outside the bioscanner's detection algorithm. The bioscanner's algorithm had been designed around the biological electromagnetic signatures of standard spacetime beings. A being who had spent extended time in fold space resonated at a frequency the algorithm simply did not look for. The adaptation reverses, Deva said. In documented cases, there are only 6 in the archive's records, and 5 of those were non-biological materials, only 1 biological. The resonance frequency gradually re-entrains to standard spacetime geometry following removal from the fold environment. It takes weeks to months. She's physically healthy otherwise, I said. Malnourished, dehydrated, exhausted. Deva looked at her notes. But structurally intact, which is remarkable, actually, given an extended period in fold conditions. There are no documented cases of a biological being surviving extended fold exposure. I looked through the doorway at Soval, who was sitting on the secondary cot with a Federation Standard Language primer that Deva had pulled up on a tablet. She was reading it with the focused, lateral, geometry-reading attention she seemed to bring to everything. She survived because she learned to read the geometry, I said. Deva looked up. I said, she told me, you learn to read the fold's geometry or you lose yourself in it. She learned to read it. Deva was quiet. Then she said, the adaptation also creates a significant administrative problem. I know, I said. The registry. The Federation Identity Registry cross-references with bioscanner verification at every checkpoint, every transit document, every status verification. If the scanner cannot detect a being, the system has no record of that being as present. Soval could stand in front of any Federation administrative interface, and the interface would return no registered identity. She would have no transit authorization, no medical record, no protected status. She would be in the language of the system, absent. What does she need for a manual registration? I asked. Deva Oss looked at her tablet. A witness verification statement from a compact registered individual, attesting to physical presence through direct observation, plus a medical exception Protocol 7 override on the scanner requirement, covering individuals whose bioscanner readings are temporarily compromised by documented external environmental factors. Fold exposure qualifies under the archive's documentation. Write the override, I said. I'll write the witness statement. Deva Oss looked at me. You're a survey contractor. I'm a Federation contractor with a compact registration stamp. That satisfies the protocol. She was quiet for a moment. Then, you understand this puts your contract registration on record as associated with a contested administrative case. Write the override, I said. We filed the papers together, Deva Oss and I, on the afternoon of the second day, at the post's administrative terminal with the generator cycling on and off in irregular intervals, and the Highland Mint on the windowsill moving slightly in the air from the ventilation unit. Deva Oss wrote the medical exception Protocol 7 override, 4 paragraphs of precise clinical language citing the archive's documentation, the 6 documented fold exposure cases, the frequency shift mechanism, and the projected resolution timeline. She attached the archive's full response as supporting documentation, the secondary scan data showing the residual electromagnetic signature, and the scan results showing the bioscanner blanks on all standard calibration settings. I wrote the witness verification statement. I looked up the required form format in the contractor documentation archive. The form was, as I had suspected, not designed for the registration of persons. It was a form I had used in infrastructure contexts for attesting to the physical presence of structures that survey instruments were failing to correctly read. The form was applicable. I filled it out. The specific language I used in the identifying information field: name, Soval, species, Velocivar. Physical presence confirmed by direct contact. Sustained the individual in physical contact for approximately 30 seconds during a fall event. Confirmed that individual has mass, weight, and structural integrity consistent with a Velocivar minor of estimated pre-adolescent age. And by continuous direct observation from a distance of less than 3 meters over a period of approximately 48 hours. Individual is ambulatory, communicative in standard language, and cognitively responsive. Witness: Kale Sond, Federation Survey Contractor Grade 3, Compact Registration Number, Date and Time Recorded. Signature: C. Sond. I signed it. I pressed my contractor's certification stamp to the lower right corner. The stamp is 22 years old, worn on the right side of the face from 41 years of use on mineral dust surfaces. The impression it makes is slightly lighter on the right side but entirely legible. It prints clean. The filing went through the registration system and returned a case reference number in under a minute. Soval existed on paper in the Federation registry. She had a case number. She had a witness statement. She had a medical exception. She was, in the language of the documentation, present. I printed the confirmation and the witness statement together and brought them to where Soval was sitting with the language primer. I set them on the cot beside her. She looked at them. She picked up the witness statement and read it through, slowly, in the deliberate way of someone reading in a second language and making sure they understand each word. Then she looked up at me. "This says I am here," she said. "Yes," I said, "it does. Even though the scanner says I am not." The scanner is a measuring instrument. It is measuring something real, the frequency shift in your cellular resonance. But it is interpreting what it measures incorrectly because it was designed around a different range of frequencies. The statement is my attestation of what I directly observe. Both are true. The statement is more complete. She looked at the witness statement again. Then she folded it, carefully, into thirds, with the clean, deliberate folds of someone who has learned to treat paper as a resource, and she pressed it between her palms for a moment before tucking it into the pocket of the ceremonial robe, over the area of her chest. She said, "Thank you." "You don't need to thank me for filling out a form accurately," I said. She looked at me. Her amber eyes were direct and very tired and very serious. She said, "That is not the thing I am thanking you for." I did not ask what the thing was. I thought I understood it. I stayed at the medical post for 6 days. My survey contract did not require this. My weekly checkpoint registration had been filed. I had other survey corridors to cover, other calculation reconciliations to complete, a relay tower foundation assessment on the north grid that I kept intending to get to. I stayed because I stayed, which is not an explanation but is the truth. In those 6 days, I understood gradually what Soval was doing. She was relearning how to exist in standard spacetime. This sounds abstract. It was not abstract. It manifested in specific, concrete ways. She would reach for a cup of water and her hand would close around it at a slightly wrong angle, not missing, but compensating for a depth perception calibration that was still slightly off from fold space geometry. She would start across a room and stop, recalibrate, continue. When she looked at the medical post's windows, she sometimes looked at them as if she was checking whether the light through them was behaving correctly. "Does it look wrong?" I asked her once, when I noticed her watching the window light with that checking expression. "Less wrong," she said, "each day less wrong." She was patient about it. She was not distressed about it, she was methodical. She had learned inside the fold that the geometry of the space around her was unreliable, and she had learned to check it constantly and recalibrate constantly, and she was applying that same approach to relearning standard spacetime. She was treating it as a survey problem. The measurements are off. Keep retaking them, note the drift, correct the model. We talked when she wanted to talk. She asked about my work with the particular focused curiosity of someone who is using questions about external things as a way to practice being in the external world. I told her about the relay towers and the pipelines, and the 41 years of mapping terrain that the official models said was one thing, and that turned out on the ground to be another. I told her about the geological survey on Kethasavel, where the underground water table was listed at 40 meters depth on the standard model, and I found it at 11, and the argument I had with the resettlement authority engineer for 3 days before they let me run the test bore and discover I was right. I told her about the water reclamation pipeline on Asavel that ran through a geological formation that every sensor tool I had said did not exist, and that I had surveyed by hand, by walking the terrain, by pressing my palm to the rock surface and feeling the water moving through it. She said, "How did you know to press your hand to the rock?" I said, "Because the instrument said there was nothing there, and I was standing on the ground and the ground felt different under my boots. The instruments were telling me the truth they could measure. My feet were telling me a different truth. I had to find out which truth was more complete." She was quiet. Then she said, "In the fold the geometry has no fixed directions. Nothing is stable. You can learn where you are relative to everything else, but the moment you have learned it, it has changed, and you must learn it again. You are always learning it again." "That sounds exhausting," I said. "Yes," she said, "but you learn to do it without thinking. Your body learns. After a while the geometry changes and your body adjusts before you are aware that it has changed." I thought about that. I said, "That is what a good surveyor does, the adjusting before you are aware of it." She looked at me with the careful amber eyes. "You are a strange man," she said. "Yes," I said, "I have been told this." "I mean it as a good thing," she said very seriously. "I know," I said, "I took it as one." On the 5th day, the Velocivar Succession Council inquiry arrived. Deva As received it through the Post's communication channel and came to find me where I was working at the secondary table. She did not say anything. She turned the terminal screen so I could read it. I read it. The inquiry was from a body called the Kethvoran Outer Zone Succession Registry, which was a Velasavar Administrative Council managing household status and inheritance claims in the contested Outer Plateau. They had received notification of Soval's registration. Federation filings are cross-notified to relevant compact administrative bodies as a matter of standard procedure. They had identified Soval's household affiliation from the intake interview data in Deva As's medical files. They were noting that the household in question had been formally dissolved as a result of the boundary dispute proceedings. Under Velasavar Succession Compact, a dissolved household's registered dependents became assets of the dissolution process, subject to transfer to the succession registry's custody for determination of status. They used the word assets. They used it 3 times about a child. They were requesting the child's transfer to the registry's custody at the earliest administrative convenience, and were asking the Federation Medical Post to confirm receipt of the inquiry and provide an estimated timeline for compliance. I read it twice. I set the tablet down. I looked at Deva As. "I need to flag this to the Regional Compact Office," she said. "They handle contested, compact jurisdiction situations." "How long for a response?" I asked. 2 to 4 weeks minimum." I looked through the doorway. Soval was working through the language primer, sitting with her feet pulled up under her on the cot in the way of a child who has found a comfortable position and is making the most of it. The folded witness statement was on the cot beside her. I said, "Before you flag it, let me look at something." I went back to my survey documents bag and found the Compact Accord reference copy I carry for frontier work, a contractor field edition, the kind that folds into a pocket and is battered from years of being in a pocket, but which is complete. I know the Compact Accord in the sections relevant to infrastructure survey work, which include land use, site access, and because I spent 18 months on the Velasavar contested Outer Plateau during a contract in my late 40s, and read the relevant sections then. The provisions governing custodial standing in contested zone situations. Article 14, Provision 7. I had written it on the registration form from memory. I read it now in full. The full text was clear. A Compact Accord protective custodial claim, filed by a compact registered individual, attested by a witness statement, accepted by the registration system, took precedence over dissolution succession asset claims under the hierarchy of compact legal instruments. Article 14 predated the relevant Velasavar succession compact provisions by approximately 4 centuries. The hierarchy was not ambiguous. I went to Deva As. I said, "The registration form I filed, Field 7, custodial party signature. I signed my name in Field 7. She was quiet. "Under the Compact Accord," I said, "a signed and accepted custodial claim in that field constitutes a formal Article 14, Provision 7 protective claim. The succession registry's dissolution asset procedure cannot be applied to an individual who is the subject of an existing Article 14 claim. The claim's hierarchy is explicit." Deva As said, "You didn't know that when you filed the form." "No," I said. "I filed the form because she needed to be in the system, and I was the person who could put her in the system. The law turned out to be exactly where it needed to be." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, very carefully, "Do you want to write the response to the succession registry inquiry?" "Yes," I said, "I do." I wrote the response. I want to be specific about what I wrote, because the specific language matters. I wrote a formal counter-notation to the succession registry's dissolution asset inquiry. I cited, by article and provision number, the Compact Accord Article 14, Provision 7, protective custodial priority precedence. I attached copies of the medical exception filing, the witness verification statement, the registration case number, the archive's fold exposure documentation, and the compact registration certification confirming my standing as a compact registered contractor in good standing. I cited the registration acceptance timestamp, which predated the succession registry's notification receipt by approximately 36 hours. I cited 4 compact accord legal precedents, cases in which Article 14, Provision 7, had been applied to override succession compact dissolution procedures, which I found in the compact accord references appendices. I noted that all 4 were unambiguously applicable. The final sentence of my counternotation read, "This individual is registered under a valid and accepted compact accord Article 14, Provision 7, protective custodial claim, case reference number, filed and accepted date and time. Dissolution succession asset procedures are inapplicable under the established hierarchy of compact legal instruments. The inquiry is noted, and the counternotation is filed as a matter of formal record." Kale Sand, Federation Survey Contractor Grade 3, Compact Registration Number. Filed via Dr. Deva As, Federation Forward Medical Post, Kethvoron Plateau. Date. I stamped it with the contractor's certification stamp. Worn face, right side slightly lighter, printed clean. Deva As reviewed it and added the post's official administrative seal. We sent it. The succession registry's response came back in 2 days. It was shorter than I expected. It cited a procedural objection to the application of Article 14, Provision 7, to a non-human minor. The provision, they argued, was designed for human federation dependents and had no established application to Velocevar nationals. They requested a formal compact review hearing to adjudicate the applicability question. I read this and then I read Article 14, Provision 7 again, paying particular attention to the definition section. The definition of the individuals to whom the provision applied was any individual registered in the Federation Compact database, regardless of species designation or biological classification, for whom a compact registered adult has assumed witnessed custodial responsibility under the terms of this provision. There was no language excluding non-human minors. There was no language excluding Velocevar nationals. There was no language limiting the provision to human federation dependents. The succession registry's argument required the provision to say something it did not say. I spent the next 6 hours in the Federation Compact legal archive, which Deva As's post had access to through the regional relay, looking for prior cases. I found 12 in which Article 14, Provision 7, had been applied to non-human dependents of non-human species. I found 3 in which it had been applied to Velocevar nationals specifically. I found 2 cases from the same contested outer plateau zone we were in, though from an earlier decade. I wrote a second response. I cited all 12 cases by archive reference number, applicable provision, and relevant quote from the determination in each case. I noted, specifically, that the 3 Velocevar national cases established direct precedent for the applicability question the registry had raised. I noted that the compact review hearing they were requesting was subject to a mandatory 30-day preliminary review period, during which the existing custodial registration remained in full legal effect and could not be superseded by any dissolution proceeding. I stamped it clean. Deva As sealed it. We sent it. Soval had watched me work during these 2 days. She had not asked what I was doing, in the specific way of someone who has learned when to ask and when to wait. On the evening of the second day, when I put the response to rest and came back to the secondary table to do the survey calculation work I had been neglecting, she looked up from the mathematics text she had moved on to. She had completed the language primer in 4 days, which Deva As told me was faster than most adult learners she had observed, and she said, "You are writing things that say I am allowed to be here." "Yes," I said. "There are people who are saying I am not allowed to be here. There are people who would like to classify you as belonging to a legal process that would use you to resolve an administrative situation," I said. "They are using language that treats you as a thing rather than a person. I am using language that says you are a person." She looked at this answer from several angles, the way she looked at survey grid problems. Then she said, "Which language is correct?" "Mine," I said. "How do you know?" "Because you are the one sitting there, and language that treats you as a thing is describing something other than what is sitting there." She absorbed this. Then she said, "The succession registry has more authority than you." "In some areas," I said. "Not in this one. In this one I have a compact registration stamp and 4 centuries of legal hierarchy on my side. Authority is not uniform. It depends on where you are standing and which provisions apply." She thought about this for a considerable time. Then she said, "In the fold there is no authority. There is only the geometry and whether you can read it." "Yes," I said, "and you could read it." "Yes," she said, "it took a long time to learn." "Most things do," I said. The mandatory 30-day review period began. During this period, I continued my survey work during the days and returned to the medical post in the evenings. Deva Os ran bioscans on Soval every 3 days to monitor the fold resonance decay. The numbers moved in the right direction, slowly at first, then more steadily as the weeks passed, the frequency signature gradually shifting back into the detection range of the bioscanner's standard algorithm. On day 9 of the review period, I was doing the morning survey calculation reconciliation at the secondary table when Soval came and sat down across from me. She looked at the survey grid printout I was working with for approximately 30 seconds. Then she said, "This line is wrong." I looked up. She was pointing at a coordinate reference on the eastern grid boundary. I looked at the calculation. Then I looked at the underlying terrain data. Then I went back to my field notes from the day before. "Explain what you see," I said. She explained it. The coordinate reference I had used for the eastern boundary alignment assumed a 40-meter horizontal offset from the plateau rim that the field measurements did not support. The field measurements put the rim approximately 18 meters further east than the offset value I had entered. The error was mine. I had copied a standard offset from a previous plateau survey rather than measuring the specific offset on this site, and the 2 plateaus had different rim geometries. The error would have produced a cascade of incorrect boundary coordinates across the entire eastern section of the grid. Not large errors individually, but accumulating over the distance of the survey corridor into something that would matter when the Reconstruction Authority tried to use my survey to set actual infrastructure positions. I looked at Soval. "How did you read that?" I said. "The numbers in the field notes are different from the numbers in the grid," she said. "The grid numbers should come from the field notes. They come from somewhere else." "Yes," I said, "from a reference table. I used a standard value instead of measuring the actual value." She looked at the grid for another moment. "In the fold," she said, "you cannot use reference values. There are no reference values. Every measurement is specific to the moment and the position. You learn to take specific measurements." I looked at this child, at her silver-white hair and her lavender skin and her amber eyes, at the folded witness statement visible at the top of the robe pocket over her chest. And I thought about what it means to learn a thing the hard way, in a place that will not let you do it the easy way. "Thank you," I said. "You found a real error." She looked at me with the serious, direct amber eyes. "You are welcome," she said, in the tone of someone who has learned the formula and is being precise about using it correctly. I corrected the survey line. I noted the correction in the field log. Then I showed her the corrected grid. She looked at it for a moment and nodded. "Once, the same small nod she had given when I told her I had not left because I had nowhere better to be. On day 30 of the review period, the bioscanner returned a clear, full-strength positive signature on Soval. Deva Os ran it twice to be sure. Both times, clear, species identifiable as Velocivar, sex and estimated developmental stage consistent with a pre-adolescent female of the outer plateau subspecies. No pathological findings except residual fold resonance decay in peripheral cellular tissue, projected to fully resolve within a further 6 to 8 weeks. She turned the scanner screen so Soval could see the result. Soval looked at the result for a long time. The scanner screen showed a green positive confirmation bar and the species identification text. She looked at it the way she had looked at the witness statement and the registration confirmation, carefully, from multiple angles, establishing that it was what it appeared to be. Then she said, "Now the scanner agrees." "Yes," Deva Os said. "It agrees with the form," Soval said, "and the form agreed with the man, and the man agreed with his eyes." Deva Os looked at me. I said nothing. Soval said, "I knew the scanner was wrong, but it is easier when it is not wrong." "Yes," I said, "it usually is." She looked at the scanner result one more time. Then she looked up at me with the amber eyes and said, "You told me the scanner was wrong and the form was right. I knew you were right, but I thought you might be wrong in a way you did not know about." "That's reasonable," I said. "I might have been. But you were not." "No," I said, "the ground was the ground." She considered this. Then she said, "What does that mean?" "It means the thing that is actually there is the truth," I said. "The scanner is a tool for reading what is there. When the tool is wrong, the thing that is there does not change. You were always there. The scanner correcting itself doesn't change what you are. It changes what the scanner says." She turned this over. Then, very quietly, in the fold no one was reading anything. There was no scanner, there was no form, there was only me. "Yes," I said. "And I was still there." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "That is the thing I know," she said. "I knew that even inside. The geometry was wrong, the time was wrong, everything was wrong, but I was still there. I kept reading the shape because I was there and the shape could be read. If I stopped reading, I would lose the shape and then I would not know where I was. But I was always there." "Yes," I said, "you were always there." She looked at the scanner result on the screen one more time. Then she looked at her own hands, lavender-skinned, with the delicate long fingers, the fold resonance iridescence almost gone now from the surface. She turned them over and turned them back. "It is strange," she said, "to be confirmed by a machine when you already know the thing the machine is confirming." "Yes," I said. "But it helps with the forms." She looked up at me and something shifted in the amber eyes, not a smile exactly, but the preparation for one, the thing that happens before a smile in a face that has been serious for a long time. "Yes," she said, "it helps with the forms." The final review determination came in on day 44, 2 days after the scheduled date. The determination upheld the preliminary finding. The succession registry's procedural objection was rejected on all grounds. The 12 cited precedents were found applicable. The Compact Accord Article 14, Provision 7, protective custodial claim was confirmed in full and recorded as valid and in effect. Deva Os printed the determination notice. She brought it to where Soval was sitting with the survey mathematics textbook. She set it on the cot. Soval read it through with the careful second language deliberateness. Then she picked up the witness statement from the cot. She had been keeping it there, unfolded now, beside whatever she was working on, and she placed the determination notice inside it and folded them together, carefully, into thirds. She held the folded papers for a moment in both hands. Then she pressed them against her chest, not to the robe pocket this time, but against the space below her sternum, with both palms flat. the specific press of someone establishing contact with something they want to feel the physical reality of. Then she placed them in the robe pocket. I did not comment on this, but I noticed. My contract was scheduled to end in 12 days. I had been thinking about this. My survey of the Keth Voron Plateau infrastructure grid was largely complete. There were 3 remaining corridor sections, which I could finish comfortably within the contract period. The damage assessment would be thorough. The reconstruction authority would have what they needed. The contract would be done. The apartment on Waystation Keth Varel was still there. It would still feel like a coffin. My wife's calibrated coffee press was still on the counter. The yellow data transfer cable was still somewhere. The secondary wool blanket was still in the sitting room cupboard. I was sitting with this, the evening of day 44, at the secondary table with the survey notes, when Soval said, "What happens when your contract ends?" I said, "I haven't decided." She said, "Will you come back?" I thought about the plateau and the chalk mineral smell and the wind and the survey grid and the error on the eastern boundary that she had found in 30 seconds. I thought about page 47 of the mathematics textbook, which she had mentioned this afternoon as containing an error she had not yet shown me. I thought about the investigation that was now in progress, separately, regarding the fold event and the fate of the others who had been in the transport, which would take months to complete, and which might or might not produce the information that Soval was not asking about, and which she would need to be somewhere stable to receive. I said, "I think it's possible there are more lines that need correcting." She looked at me for a moment, then she looked back at the mathematics textbook. "Page 47, she said. "Show me," I said. She showed me. She was right. The error on page 47 was in the 3rd step of a triangulation calculation, a missing coefficient that propagated incorrectly through the following 6 exercises. She had not just found the error. She had traced it to its source and identified how it moved through the subsequent material. I looked at the source of the error and the propagation path she had mapped. I said, "You found all of this." "The geometry was wrong," she said. "The wrong geometry produces more wrong geometry. You have to find the first wrong thing." "Yes," I said, "that is correct. That is exactly correct." She looked up from the textbook. "Is that what you do, find the first wrong thing?" "Yes," I said, "and then correct it, and then check what the correction changes." She looked down at the book again. "That is what I did in the fold," she said. "Find the wrong thing, correct for it, check what changed, find the next wrong thing." "Yes," I said. "It is the same," she said. "Yes," I said, "more or less." We sat with the mathematics textbook between us for a while. The generator cycled. The Highland mint on the windowsill moved in the ventilation unit air. The 4th-month light through the window was beginning to go pale and thin at the edges, the particular quality of late afternoon on the plateau, when the angle of the light changes and the chalk distances seem to extend. "You should stay," Soval said. She did not look up from the textbook. "Yes," I said. "I think I should. I need to tell you about the ending, and the ending is not the kind that wraps cleanly, because nothing about this situation was going to wrap cleanly, and I have been in the survey business long enough to know that the absence of clean resolution is not the same as the absence of resolution. Soval is at the medical post. The fold resonance decay in her peripheral tissue is continuing to resolve on Deva As's projected schedule. The bioscanner reads her clearly on all settings. The compact custodial claim is in effect. The succession registry filed a secondary procedural notice, which I counter-notated with 3 additional precedent citations inside 48 hours, and which has been sent to the compact regional review office for a second review determination that the regional office advises will be completed within 60 days. The investigation into the fold event is ongoing. I do not know when it will produce findings or what those findings will be. Soval does not ask me about it directly. Sometimes, when the communication channel produces a new notification ping, she looks up and then looks back down again without asking what the notification is. I answer her if the notification is about the investigation and I have information to give. Otherwise, I do not fill the silence with speculation. I extended my contract. The Reconstruction Authority was pleased. The survey work I had been doing was solid and they wanted continuity. I am doing the 3 remaining corridor sections, and then, by mutual agreement, beginning a secondary survey of the Eastern Plateau Rim, which, as it turns out, has a different geometry from the reference tables currently used for this section of the outer zone, a discrepancy that will matter for every piece of infrastructure placed on the eastern slope for the next 100 years. I am going to correct the reference tables. Soval has taken to working through the mathematics textbook in the mornings and assisting me with the calculation reconciliation in the afternoons. This is not an official arrangement. It is simply the pattern that has emerged. She finds the errors. I verify them. I explain what the errors would produce if left uncorrected. She understands the explanation always, and usually extends it into consequences I had not traced yet. Last week she said, "Why do the reference tables have errors?" I said, because the people who made the reference tables were working from measurements taken by instruments that were not perfectly calibrated, in terrain they did not have complete access to, under time pressure, and the errors were small enough that they did not produce obvious problems in the uses the tables were first put to. She thought about this, then she said, so the errors were always there. Yes, I said. And they were only found when someone looked for them. Yes, I said. When someone used the tables in a context where the errors produced a consequence that was large enough to notice. She looked at me. Like me, she said. I was always there. The scanner was not looking in the right place. Yes, I said, like you. She nodded once small, then she went back to the calculation. I want to add the one thing I keep returning to when I think about this. On the morning of day 44, when the final determination came in and Deva Os printed it, and Soval folded it into the witness statement and pressed both hands flat against the papers against her chest, there was a moment before she put them in her pocket. A moment where she held the papers with both palms flat, eyes closed. I have been trying to name what that was for 3 months, and I think what it was is this. She was checking whether it was real, whether the papers had substance, whether the thing the papers said was carried in the papers themselves, in the weight of them, in the specific grain and fold of them, whether holding them told her something that reading them could not. It did, I think it did. I think she could feel that they were real. I understand that. I have been pressing my palm to rock faces for 41 years to feel what the instruments cannot measure. I understand what you learn from physical contact that you cannot learn from the readout. I understand why, when a person has been in a place where nothing could be verified except through their own continued presence and their own continued effort to read the geometry, they might want to feel a piece of paper that says you are here against the flat of their hands. She was always there. The form said so. The scanner eventually said so. I said so from the beginning. The ground was always the ground. I am going to stay and see what the Eastern Plateau Rim actually is. I think it is going to be different from the reference tables. I think that will be important. I have nowhere better to be.